fourth grade, we're going to just do a quick review of decimals and fractions and how they kind of work together, and kind of talk about equivalent fractions and equivalent decimals and how they are kind of interchangeable and how we can use all of them to help make some problems easier. So our first example, we're just going to start really simple with like 1/10. Okay, so in order to write this as a decimal, we would say, well, 1/10 is less than 1, so there's going to be a 0 in the ones place. And then the tenths place is right after the decimal. And since this is 1/10, we would put a 1 in that spot. So 1/10 is equal to 0.1. And we've kind of talked about this already, but we're going to go a teensy bit more in depth today. So these are both 1/10. They are equal. They are equivalent, a fraction and a decimal. In order to write this as a fraction out of 100, what I would do is I would take 1/10, and to get from 10 to 100, I multiply by 10. So I can show times 10 over 10, but what really happens when I multiply by 10 over 10 is that I'm just adding a 0 to both numbers. So I'm adding a 0 to the 1 to make it 10, and I'm adding a 0 to the 10 to make it 100. So 1/10 equals 10 hundredths, okay? But then to write that as a decimal, 10 hundredths is still less than 1, so I don't have anything in the 1 spot. Then I have my decimal point, and then 10 hundredths would just be 10. Now let's kind of look at these steps. So we have 0.1 and we have 0.10. So 1/10 and 10 hundredths. What do you notice about these decimals? Well, first off, I notice that this one is only in the tenth spot and this one goes to the hundredth spot. But I also notice that if I were to put a 0 right here, that they would be the same. And so you can add as many zeros as you'd like after a decimal, and all it does is it changes how you read it, but it doesn't really change the value. It just changes the denominator of the fraction, how many pieces it's cut into, but the amount that are shaded in won't change. So 1/10 is equal to 10 hundredths, just like 1/10 as a decimal is the same as 10 hundredths here. So we can kind of use all of this information as we go through and learning about decimals to help us maybe compare soon or order decimals, or maybe even to add them in the future. Let's do 8/10 next. So 8/10, if I were to write that as a decimal, it would be 0.8. Now, if I were to write 8/10 as a fraction out of 100, I would multiply by 10 over 10. And just like we showed you up here, when you multiply by 10, you're adding a 0 to each number. So I can literally just take this and add a 0 to the 8 and add a 0 to the 100 to make it 80 hundredths. Now my new decimal that I have is not 0.8, but 0.80. So these are all equivalent. They all equal each other. They're just written out of different denominators, different amounts of pieces that are cut into the pie. So this one is tenths, this one is hundredths, but they are both equivalent. Okay, so today you're going to be shading in tenths and hundredths and showing how they're the same and writing your decimals and fractions. So all very similar to what we've been doing, but just kind of bringing it full circle with fractions and decimals. All right, do your best.